Hey everyone, this is Derrick Broze with the Conscious Resistance Network. And as you guys know, if you've been paying any attention around the world, digital IDs are marching out and they're expanding in every direction. And if you've been following my work, if you read my book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, you've known this was coming, so this shouldn't be a huge surprise to you. But maybe what is a surprise is the rapid pace that it's happening. It's about to be 2026. We know this is part of something called Agenda 2030, Sustainable Development Goals, the Great Reset. So again, it shouldn't be that much of a surprise that we're seeing these agendas pace forward very rapidly. But I think what's most important to understand is what you can do about it. And my friend that I'm going to have on today, who you've heard me speak to many times over the years, is focused on the solutions, not only in technology, but in our spiritual technology, if you will, and our mental technology. And today we're going to be talking about his new report, which I think is one of the most important reports out right now. And more than any of the other kind of drama in the headlines, people should be reading this report. They should be understanding it, especially if you aren't very familiar with what your country's doing in terms of digital IDs and biometrics and things of that sort. And most importantly, what you can actually do about that. So to tell me all about this new report, I'm going to bring on my friend, Hakeem Anwar, old friend Hakeem Anwar, who is joining the show for maybe the fourth or fifth time now. How you doing, brother?
Derrick, it's good to be back, man. Here ideating solutions with you and everyone who's watching.
Yeah, thanks for being here, brother. For those who don't know or haven't seen our previous conversations, they will be in the show notes. Hakeem is, of course, the founder, the CEO of Above Phone, abovephone.com, and then, of course, the Take Back Our Tech project over at takebackourtech.org, and was part of the Freedom Cells team that helped us build our website back in 2020, also part of the original team of the Greater Reset, now known as the People's Reset, and he will be speaking again here in Mexico in January. We'll talk about that in just a bit, but let's just jump into it, brother. You've got this great new report here. I'll put it on screen. Again, everybody, this will be in the show notes. This great report that is called Life Under Digital ID, a global analysis with solutions. And I mean, this is one of, as I was saying a moment ago, one of the most extensive looks, I think, at the situation, the worldwide situation facing humanity. And I highly encourage everybody to get a copy ASAP. All you got to do is just sign up, put your email in there, join their email list. And I like that you even have it set up because I know you like to tailor your content to giving the user what they want the most. So people can decide if they want to get all your emails or if they just want to get educational stuff or promotional offers, webinar announcements, things like that. I encourage you guys to go ahead and sign up for all of the emails and make sure you get everything that Hakeem and Above Phone and Take Back Our Tech are involved with. But let's just start with, what was your main motivation for doing this? I mean, this is a huge project. When you shared it with me, it was, I think, double the size of the final version. What was your main reason for wanting to do this?
Derrick, well, thanks for all the kind words. I think a few months back, I started to see the digital ID issue show up in more and more places. This country is doing this. This country is putting this. They're working on their digital ID app. And I saw a lot of people talking about it with some good, intuitive common sense. But, as a software engineer, I didn't think that was like a good enough understanding. I wanted to know, what does digital ID really mean? I wanted to have a good definition for it. And I wanted to at least point to the technology it's built on. And then I think this is important as someone who's been inspired by your book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State. You really have to know how these things work in order to do something about it. So I decided to study pretty much every program in the world, at least some on every continent. And it led me to this digital ID report. So I've been working on that for a few months. I was just in the EU, too, to talk to people there to see what they think about digital ID in their countries. And most importantly, to try and answer the question, if this digital ID system does get implemented and we just go along with it, what is life going to be like under digital ID? So those are the questions I was just trying to answer.
Yeah, and let me fix that real quick. No, I don't like that one either. Hold on. Let me go to this one. Yeah, and you kind of answered my next question there was, besides your own experience and your desire to want to spread awareness, in your view, do you think digital ID is as big of a threat as myself and others have been warning, and maybe one that the audience out there and including people who are very much concerned about vaccine passports and everything we saw during COVID-19 '84, do you think this is a worldwide threat, a threat to humanity that people just aren't yet contending with?
Yeah, if COVID-19 was like the pilot episode, this is season 1 of Technocracy. And we have both done a lot of work on the surveillance grid, talking about Palantir and how all of these systems are being centralized. So the surveillance grid is watching everything that you're doing. What digital ID and digital public infrastructure it's the control grid, which it's not just going to be watching everything, but it's going to be able to programmatically shut you out of whatever it thinks you can't have access to. And so that's the way it's designed. So looking at different countries, after researching how they're doing it in the East, looking at India, China, and Russia, and looking how they're doing in the West, the more democratic countries of the EU, I saw that there was two major things that create a digital ID. And so the first thing is interoperability, which means the digital ID can be used in every facet of your life. Whether you're trying to buy some alcohol and you go into the store, it could be used for age verification. It could also be used for age verification online. It could also be used for driving, right? Paying your toll tickets, things like that. So quickly, if digital ID starts to get integrated in all of these systems, you see how it has a comprehensive look at everything you're doing. And the more dangerous part is the other aspect where it's verifiable. These identities are created verifiable by one party, whether that's the government, whether that's an issuing body like Google or Apple, which have their own digital IDs. So when one issuer has control of these digital IDs, they could also cancel them, which will impact everything it's dependent on. So that's why it's the most important subject. And you can really see with their timeline, they're trying to make sure everyone has a digital ID by 2030. That's not a loose plan. They're actually trying to make sure they hit that number.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm glad that you're putting this report together to kind of make these details more known to people. Because as you said, you looked at nearly every country in the world, definitely every continent. Let's start there. Just off the bat, what do you think is the worst place in terms of this is already being advanced? Because, we know that, maybe some of the audience don't know, but I know that you're aware, and I've been paying attention for years to Estonia, places like Estonia, which went digital 20 years ago, was the first place in, if not the world, definitely in the EU to go digital, and has been the model for a lot of other nations. Also, I talk about in my book, and I know you put it in your report, India, the Aadhaar system, the biometric scanning of billions of people. Of course, China is well known for some of their systems. Where would you say these agendas are the most advanced, or let's say the most complete?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So in the report, I tried to classify where these programs are at, anywhere from pilot stage to operational, which means there's stuff available, all the way to complete, which means that 60% of the population has adopted it. And like you pointed out, places like Estonia and India, they are complete. In India, it's most definitely over 90% use of the digital ID there, and that's through mandate by proxy. So it's one of those countries where you can't even find a place to live without a digital ID. And that's not because there's any law written to it. In fact, the Supreme Court ruled in India that you can't be punished. You cannot be punished for not having a digital ID. Yet banks demand it. Cell phone providers demand it. They're very aggressive about it. And so if you're left without one of these things, it's like you're off the grid. You don't really have a life. Similarly with Estonia, they have a bit of a, it's the same thing. It's used for everything that you could do to get insurance, to interact with the government. Countries like Estonia and Denmark, those are the two most mature programs in the EU. And it's just basically used in every part of life. Denmark especially too, it's integrated into both of these countries' financial systems. So that's the second component of digital public infrastructure is they call it unified payments, right? These payment apps. And so all of their banking apps and the banks in the country are integrated with their digital ID, which means that they need to rely on their identities working. So it's really interesting. This is part of the cool research I was able to do with this report. I went to the Google Play Store where these apps are released, and I looked at the reviews. I looked at India's reviews and Denmark reviews, two really different countries. I think people like to make fun of Indians that they can't build. And I'm not Indian, by the way, so it doesn't impact me at all. But people like to make fun of Indians that they can't build software. But when you look at India's app and Denmark's app, the reviews across the board are really, really bad. Like these apps are always breaking down and leaving people in really tough situations where they can't access their bank account or they can't log into a government service. So life becomes really inconvenient for people who adopt these systems early on.
Absolutely. And I remember reading probably when I was doing research for how to opt out years ago that there were already deaths that had been attributed to the Aadhaar system, namely because of in parts of India where there's lack of infrastructure. If you have people completely dependent on welfare systems and it's all digital and they walk, like, for example, the story I was reading was like a man who's a farmer who's, subsisting just on his weekly or daily payments through Aadhaar. He had to walk a few miles or, some long distance to get to the place where he would go get his welfare. And when he showed up after this long walk, he ends up going there and they're like, all of our systems are shut down. And this happened for a number of days and maybe even more than a week. And at least, and this is years ago, at least a few people's deaths had been attributed to that, to the system basically being down, which to me just points to the problem, one of the many problems of relying on these completely dependent, totally networked digital systems. And you mentioned Denmark. I know I've shared this with you and I've shared on some of my shows in the past. Miriam and I went to Denmark last year after we did the People's Reset UK, and I did a few talks out there. And it was interesting because I'm giving my usual talk about exit and build, and somebody raises their hand and they're like, Derrick, we already have this here. We can't ride the bus without my digital ID. We can't rent a house. We can't get a job. We can't get insurance or open a bank account. And so there was only one person in the room who wasn't using the My Digital ID and who had found kind of ways around it. And they were all immediately like, okay, what do we do? And so, these things are already happening in places like that. I'm curious if you came across in any of your research, because I saw that from what I was finding that technically places like Estonia and India and elsewhere, but specifically I'm thinking of Estonia, that they're not mandatory, right? These programs, like you're kind of saying, it's not mandatory, but then they just use corporations and these other entities like banks to sort of bring in the systems. And so I started to look up to see if anybody in Estonia was, since it's not mandatory, was actually existing outside of the systems. Because according to some of the numbers I found, they said it was like 98 to 99% of the country was using it, but there was still a certain very small percentage of people, maybe numbering in the thousands, who were not using it. And I was trying to find any kind of information on that because I would be very curious to talk to those people to see how they're living and surviving and maybe thriving in a country that's been digital for 20 years, because I think that could give us, those of us in countries that are just starting to do this, some insight into how we might be able to live outside of that. But did you come across any of that in terms of it being mandatory and people trying to still live outside of it?
No, that's a really good direction to take a closer look at. I was mainly focused on how the government messaging around the programs, and what's relevant here is also how they kind of muddy the waters with how many people are using it. So, for instance, Denmark's digital ID, MIT ID, which is Danish for my, they reported around like a 96.6 adoption. Which can mean a lot of things. That doesn't necessarily mean everyone uses it every day, but it does mean that those digital identities have been created for people. Also, the language on the Danish website is like, it basically says if you're a citizen in Denmark, you are obligated to have a digital ID. And also, this is weird, but everyone receives a digital mailbox. It's like an email address where only the government can send you email. And so the government will send you email through the system, and it doesn't work for anything else. So it's very interesting the level that goes. But I didn't dig in deeper to try and find people who maybe were living outside of this. I do believe there probably are some, most likely from older generations. But yeah, I think that would be a good area to research further.
Probably, unfortunately, right, that if there are people, which I imagine there are some, even according to the numbers I was finding online from the government, there's a small percentage. They probably are from that older generation that haven't adopted it because, as we know, most of us youth are just embracing this like it's the cool thing to do. And many of us, especially those younger than us, even who've grown up with the cell phone, smartphone in hand, like the internet and everything being digital is just pretty normal. So the idea of opting out of something like this just sort of seems unnecessary, or maybe just even weird. Like, why would you want to do that?
Impossible, right? Because people are, well, I won't say impossible, but people our age aren't going to be the ones to have real property that they own completely under their name. So it totally makes sense, right? They're rentoids, they need a bank account, they need to do this stuff. So yeah, and sure, part of it is probably culture as well. But I think you bring up some good points about how the system can fail people. And I hadn't read people actually dying as a result of a down digital ID system. And I just think it's really funny because, well, I think it's sad and ironic that these programs are presented as a way to be inclusive so people can get these services. Otherwise, without them, they wouldn't have access to education and social services and healthcare. And so wherever you go, in whichever country, it's always positioned as like a humanitarian effort. But they never stop to discuss, well, why is everything behind a digital ID wall anyways? Isn't it simply enough just to be a human to get services like these? And they never talk about how they are the ones, preventing these people from getting care. I just think that's interesting, and you see that everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, that goes to the messaging that we've heard for years from Bill Gates and from others, the UN and all the folks trying to push this, especially the SDGs, the idea that getting people onto a digital ID is now it's a human right. I've written about that over the years, how this digital ID as a human right is a scam. And what that really is about getting as many people into these systems as possible. We need those unbanked farmers. We need those unbanked Indian workers and Mexican workers to be able to join the systems. So I think we know where this is headed and what this is about. Now let's go in the opposite direction. I asked you about which areas you saw that were the most far along in their agendas. Which areas of the world did you find were either did not have any sort of plans yet, or just in the beginning stages of their rollout of digital ID and DIP?
Yeah, I think most people would be surprised to hear that this is happening pretty much everywhere. Like I'm talking like 90% of countries. Any country that is established and has some sort of economy has either a digital ID program, or if they haven't gotten to the point where most of the people in the country have phones, then they're doing biometric backed electronic IDs, as is the case with countries in Africa, which is, so in developing countries, if they don't have enough money to do these programs, you have initiatives like the World Bank's Identification for Development initiative, where they spend billions of dollars to these low and middle income countries, and they just help them start, right? Because there's a precursor to digital ID. It kind of has to evolve into that. So first they need electronic IDs or physical cards, and they also need to collect biometrics. So that's what their programs are specialized in. And so through ID4D, over 50 countries now have these programs. In South America, believe it or not, there's only one country that's just not pursuing anything at all, and that is a country called Suriname, which is close to Brazil. It's in the part of the Amazon rainforest, and it's known as a lawless anarchist country, which means it's very, very dangerous. Now, I watched some travel vlogs in Suriname, and honestly, it looks pretty cool. At least the big city, because there's like a blend of different cultures there: Chinese, Indian, and Caribbeans. So the food looks good, but again, it's like a country where it's supposed to be lawless. There's almost like no government whatsoever. So there's countries like that. In Africa, there are Africa and the Middle East. It's mostly the war-torn countries or countries heavily impacted by sanctions that can't go after programs like this. Like, for instance, Iran it's not planning on a digital ID program. They do, however, already have an electronic ID system. Yemen, similarly, is just too war-torn to do anything about it. And then there's, I would say the largest block of countries would be 15 countries in Africa, typically on the eastern side, a lot of the poorest countries that aren't pursuing a program. But, I really doubt, like, it's not a safe bet to be like, okay, that country doesn't have a program, I'm just going to go there, because the same thing will repeat itself. Whenever there is enough of a push by these international organizations they'll get the funding to do those programs eventually. I think they're just very strategic about that, and they're going for more for richer middle income countries first. So long story short is this is happening everywhere, and there's nowhere to run to. There's nowhere to escape to. Derrick, you're monumental because it was your work that helped people during the vaccine lockdowns. A lot of people from all the world moved to Mexico because it was not enforcing that. Now I feel like this digital ID issue is universal, and there's nowhere to run to, which is in one way horrifying. But on the other hand, it's also empowering because the boats are burned behind us. Like civilization's not going to be the same again, and we have no choice but to build.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And just a couple of things that you said there. One, I want to ask you about in a moment the difference between electronic ID and digital ID, because I know you've spent some time even trying to get to the bottom of how do you define digital ID. But since you mentioned Mexico, I just want to share my thoughts on that because I've reported on this already and I've written some articles. But for those who haven't heard, over the summer, Mexico passed a whole set of laws. I was kind of nicknaming it the Mexican Big Beautiful Bill because of Trump's bill around that time, which was a massive omnibus bill. It had all kinds of different things. Most of it was related to privacy. And essentially, for years now, there have been politicians saying because of kidnappings by cartels and criminals who will use anonymous SIM cards that they buy at the local corner store without ID and without any sort of KYC. Because of them using these phones and kidnapping people, we need to pass new measures which will require, which will basically turn the CURP, which is essentially a Mexican social security number, is one way for Americans to think about it, and to make that a biometric process. Now, for years, Mexico has already had biometrics when, like many countries, like if you were to join the country, become a resident or become a citizen, they take fingerprints, they do face print, that sort of thing. But now they were saying, well, the CURP is going to become biometric and that people will have to use it for all kinds of things, from eventually they claim buying the SIM cards at the corner store to getting insurance, to getting a bank account, to even they talk about how there's this My Key is what they call it, a key, an ID to access the internet. So this bill had just a whole bunch of scary stuff in it, and it passed. And immediately, of course, the internet starts reacting. And in my view, a lot of people were a bit hyperbolic and continue. I still see people sharing these biometric update, which I'd like their website. They do good work, but these biometric update articles from back in July and just kind of showing up in the Mexico Freedom Cell and Telegram or in my email inbox and saying, oh my God, Derrick, what's happening? Freaking out. And, my general feeling has been, yes, this is happening, just like you said a moment ago. And like I've been telling people for years, this isn't a run to Mexico or run to anywhere in the world and think that you're going to escape these things. I mean, these are truly worldwide agendas. So if you're surprised that something like this is happening in Mexico, you shouldn't be, because eventually it's going to happen everywhere. At least the attempts are going to happen everywhere. But still, my sentiment is that Mexico doesn't have the infrastructure that Denmark has, that China has, that Estonia has. Now, obviously, India proved that rural places that have a massive population that is in poverty, which Mexico does have some of, as much as they have wealth as well, that it can be done. Bill Gates has proved if you put enough money into it, you can go around and scan the faces of 1 billion people. So not to say that it couldn't happen, but it's my belief that outside of the major cities like Mexico City, Guadalajara, Monterrey, and other places like that, it's going to take them years to implement this. They claim, according to this law, it's going to be rolled out by February 2026. I have no belief in my mind that is going to happen at all. And I even, I'm keeping up with what's going on. So I went and bought some SIM cards recently, and everything still seems to be normal. We're keeping up with the updates. I'm not telling people to completely discount what was been reported or to act like nothing's happening. We need to be aware of these things. But I do think it was very much exaggerated on the internet, and people who have no awareness or understanding of how things work in Mexico. Laws can get passed. That doesn't mean it's going to affect the daily life of the average person in Mexico. But again, that doesn't mean it's not going to happen eventually. I just think it will take a little bit longer. We'll have to wait and see. But so, yeah, it is, as you said, not an issue where we can just think I'm going to run away somewhere. Now, of course, part of what I talk about, exit and build, some of that does have to do with moving to a physical location. So maybe you do think there's another country, whether Mexico or elsewhere, or this place in the Amazon jungle, that you want to go move and live for a little while. But at some point, you need to plant your roots, whether that's your home country, hometown, city, the state over, whatever. Like, you need to find somewhere that's going to be the place you want to plant your roots and thrive and survive longer to the future. Because it is my belief that as much as I like to travel, and I know you feel similarly, Hakeem, having just gone to the EU, kind of with the feeling that like this might be the last chance to do so without giving up my biometrics, it might not be possible for those of us who love to travel to continue to do so, long into the future. I wish that wasn't the world we were living in. I wish there was mass resistance at the airports to facial recognition. I wish there was mass opting out and all these things that would maybe slow this thing down or even prevent it. Unfortunately, I don't see it. I was glad to see protests in the UK, responding to the recent announcement there. But in the US, it doesn't seem like there's much resistance. So it is my belief that this is likely inevitable because there isn't much resistance. And if that's the case, then we need to start thinking about what are we actually going to do? And so I want to get to the solutions in just a moment, but I did want to ask you, because as I said, I know you spent some time thinking about what does that even mean to have a digital ID? And you mentioned that Iran had an electronic ID, but not a digital ID. Could you first distinguish between those two things and then give us your definition of digital ID?
Sure. So like I said, there's different stages to get towards an actual digital ID. And so an electronic ID, you could think of it as just, in the US, it's your social security number. And in Mexico, it's a CURP. And it's just a number or some sort of code that exists in a database tied with your legal identity. So maybe your name, your birth date, your gender, where you live. And that information is just in some sort of government database somewhere. That's enough to constitute an electronic ID. So we mentioned Estonia earlier. They've had an electronic ID for a long time. Same with Pakistan. They've had an electronic ID system called Nadra since 2004. And so this electronic ID system, it exists for a while. And then there's another law that's passed that says, all right, from now on, if you're in the system or you're updating your registration number, you're also going to have to submit biometrics. And so now it's another thing added into this database alongside next to your name. So you'll do your facial scan, your fingerprints, whatever needs to get added in there. So then it's a biometric ID. And finally, a digital ID. What the clear distinction between that is, whereas an electronic ID or a biometric ID may only be used in government circumstances, a digital ID is interoperable. So it's kind of built in mind to be decentralized, which means that it's not just for government. Not just for use in government. It can be used across to authenticate in all systems, including the internet. It could be opened up as a third-party service, as they've done in India, as they've done in China. And what this enables others to do is now enforce the digital ID onto you simply by offering their services as a business. And so I in the report, I talk about the different stages before and after digital ID is introduced, where the first phase is, it's not too bad. Like, it makes your life convenient in some ways. And that's the carrot phase, right? They really would like you to use it. They need to increase the adoption. So it'll be put in places that could potentially make your life more convenient. I'm sure you've seen the lines at the airport, the manual line where you're not in the pre-check line or whatever, and then the facial scan line, which is very popular in the US. Things like that, right? Your digital ID will make your life more convenient wherever you go. And then after there is enough adoption, and for a lot of countries, this year is 2027. In the EU, that's where companies need to accept digital ID as a form of authentication. So it'll become more pervasive the more places you can use your digital ID. And from then, companies can, it's their own private decision for how they want to accept their customers. And what you'll start to see is more and more places are accepting digital ID, and some places maybe only accept digital ID. Even in places that could be like against the law, maybe they just do it anyways because they want more security, or maybe it makes more sense because they're in a financial setting. And so eventually you get mandated by proxy with all these different things using digital ID. And that's kind of where this grows into. Then when you look into the late stage digital ID, that's a good way to call it, like Russia and China, then you start to see the CCTV cameras at the Moscow metro can see who you are. And if you have submitted your biometrics along with your legal identity, they can see exactly who you are. So if you get called for the draft in Russia, which is the thing right now, if you get called for the draft and you don't respond in 20 days, you're spotted on the bus or you're spotted on the metro, they will come detain you. They will come find you and they'll come detain you. So that is the end goal of a digital ID, right? Any you can be detained at any time for any reason and you can be spotted. But this will only happen if you provide your biometrics along with your legal identity. That's why it's really important to resist this part as much as you can. And people have pushed back on this saying, hey, the internet's a thing. There's cameras anywhere. Can't they just grab your identity from that? Well, no, I think this is important because it sets the legal pretext for your identity. You have to put the biometrics along with your legal identity. So the next 2 years is we're going to see this. We're going to push really hard for the adoption, and you've got to try just as hard to resist and find manual ways around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard similar things from some people who say, well, Derrick, I already took my picture for a driver's license a decade ago. They've already got my face, or things like that. And while there's truth to that, I still think, like I think you were saying a moment ago, that we should still resist at every option we have. It doesn't mean we should just be like, well, because I walked into a public place one time and there may have been a facial recognition camera or any other number of ways, or I've been posting selfies of my face for years on the internet. They've already got everything they need. That doesn't mean we should make this any easier. We should still resist and try to, just slow it down wherever possible. So let's talk about that for these last few minutes before we talk about some other things that you have going on. This report here, which I'll pull back up again, everybody, please do go ahead and sign up so you can get a copy of this. You're not going to regret it. Life Under Digital ID, a global analysis with solutions. You also get into what we can do about it, as you talk about how much time do we have and what can we do about this. So let's talk a little bit about that. You know what my solutions are. I've talked about them in my book. I've talked about them in my videos in terms of exit and build and resisting and non-compliance. I'm assuming that you think similarly, but what sort of practical things would you like to share with people today? Because as you know, there's so many people in our friend circles, family circles, and the broader freedom movement who understand the information we're talking about. And now they're like, what am I actually going to do about it? I heard that my country's rolling out this program. I see it on the horizon. I'm with you. I understand the dangers. What do I actually do about it? And what would you say to somebody like that?
Yes, and on top of the things that you read about the exit and build philosophy, which is the peer-to-peer cash and barter systems, which are great, right? These actually need to be built now. It's not just like a philosophy or an ideal. We actually have to build these things, and I think the best way to think about it is, hey, think about if you were to go to the grocery store and you couldn't get into it anymore because now at the little doors at the front that they have now you have to use your digital ID to get in. So what other places could you get those goods? Could you go to the farmer's market? So you start to go to the farmer's market, and everyone you meet there, when you start to develop relationships, you've kind of got to bring this in the conversation. Hey, I know this digital ID system is being rolled out internationally. You could talk about places like India, China, and Russia where they're only using digital IDs and digital payments, and just want to say, hey, I'm not comfortable with this. I think it's a massive invasion of our privacy. I think it's insecure to risk your biometrics like that. And I just want to make sure, no matter whatever happens, you've got this wonderful produce here from your farm. Can I count on you to never enforce digital payments or digital ID on me? Can we work something out? And, I'm trying to condense this conversation down into like a 30-second thing. And it's not really how it happens. But to build this in-person network is the most important thing you can do right now. Replace all your alliances with in-person things or things that might come through a company or people you don't know, and just bring it back locally. So that's one really important thing. There's also the aspect of going local, which seems obvious. And I think that you cover this really well in your book, where you talk about, the farther away from the city, the farther away from technocracy you will be. And the same thing applies here. So even with things like the EU travel ban, one thing to note is that when they pass the deadline, it's the implementation period of 6 months. So I was there at some of the biggest airports. They already had that stuff ready, But I bet if I went to some of the smaller airports, which I did go to some of the smaller airports in the EU, you didn't see that stuff. So there are ways to adjust your travel where you're going through smaller border checkpoints, where you're going through smaller airports, and you may need to route through a different country first. I think it's really important to think about this stuff if you're going to the EU. I know the US recently passed laws as well. I think it's probably a bit harder to do that in the US. You might look at land borders. So, and also for the people in places where biometrics have now become part of renewing your ID, which might get sprung on you, I would say to go farther out, away from the cities, go to the most country office you can if you do have to renew your ID, and that will improve your chances. So that's one way to really avoid being rolled into this digital ID system, and also to make sure your needs are met, whether it's there or not.
Yeah, thank you for those ideas. I think that everybody needs as many seeds of ideas as possible as we move further into this digital ID world. Because even when I was writing How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, and I've been revisiting it recently as I'm doing this opt-out challenge over on Civil, and there aren't perfect ideas for all these situations. I have some ideas that have worked for me, but I recognize, and as I did when I wrote the book, and maybe you see the same with what you're putting here, is that everybody's got different situations, different lifestyles, different monetary situations, et cetera, that are all going to factor into the choices you're going to make, right? So for some people, they might have the opportunity to pick up and move and go somewhere else. Others, that feels very difficult, maybe stuck in, living check to check and things like that. But I do believe that everybody in every situation can take some steps, big or small, to try to lessen their dependence on these systems, because really there's no other way around it. And I wanted to get your opinion real quick before we switch gears. I've been asked a number of times by mainly older folks who are in 60s, 70s and above, who are retired and who have pensions or who get Social Security checks. And they're concerned because obviously many of these people are not working anymore, and they're dependent on that money coming in to feed themselves, to take care of themselves. And they understand fully well that those systems are going to go towards digital IDs and go towards biometrics, and that will essentially become mandatory. I think no matter which country you're talking about, that's probably the easiest way to force people into compliance, is if they're already dependent on you, well, then you can tell them to do whatever you want, and basically they're going to do it out of feeling like they have no other choice. And so I have my thoughts and ideas on this, and I never have a perfect answer. But yeah, what would you say to someone in that situation that finds themselves dependent on a welfare check, a veterans check, a pension, some government-related, money and funds coming in, who doesn't know what options are available to them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really tough question, and to assume that eventually is going to be put behind a digital ID wall is a scary idea. I think right now we need to be extremely smart and strategic with our money and where we're putting it. And so that might look very creative things. And it's kind of interesting because if society is going to break down, it's going to look more like a tribal setup where now one person can't afford a house or a property. Maybe it'll take 5 or 10 people to live in a house or property. And, no one likes to hear that, because it's quite a drop in your lifestyle. But these are realistic things that you might have to do. And I would say to build connections with people who do have land and property, which many people are already doing through the Freedom Cell Network, through the People's Reset. You guys are going ahead and making those moves, which is good. And I think you guys should, I think anyone who is potentially in that position should take it more seriously, and find some way to make, I'm trying to say this without sounding, what's the word here? Unsympathetic. I am sympathetic, but also it's like we all have to find ways to make ourselves useful. And I think it's almost a matter of pride and dignity. I remember my grandma, she wanted to do everything herself when she was nearing the end of her life. And, unfortunately, it's like it's going to take a whole tribe of people living together. If you don't have pension coming in, then there's got to be another way you contribute to the greater good. And there's probably a million ways you can do that in your individual situation. But this long answer short is to start to make connections as much as possible with people who are already set up in places with self-sufficiency.
Yeah, I definitely think that counter economic community is going to be more important than ever. And yeah, I do empathize with people in that situation. And I think those of us who aren't in that situation, whatever age you may be, maybe if you're a little older and you're close to that, it might be too late. But if you're younger and you haven't set out on that path where you're going to be dependent on government in some way, or planning for a future, I don't think most young people are planning for a future where Social Security is even a thing. But I think that it's a real lesson to learn that being dependent on those systems, and this is not a blame, victim blaming to anybody who does find themselves in this position, because many of us were, especially the older generations, you guys were fed lies and propaganda that the American dream was going to last forever. And so many of you maybe put yourself in positions where you've got, mortgages and things like that tie you to these systems because you believe that you would be able to exist in that and still, live the life that you want. Unfortunately, that is not the reality. I think that the more tied you are to those systems, the more difficult it's going to be to avoid biometrics and digital ID. So that's a lesson to those of us who haven't started on that path. Maybe start thinking about alternative paths before you end up in that direction. Now, I did want to just mention one more time here, everybody, go to the link here. It is at abovephone.com/digital-ID. Of course, it'll be in the show notes. And once again, I encourage you to sign up and get all of the emails from Above Phone, because you'll get a lot of important announcements. I was just checking out a moment ago. I mean, you guys have so many other really cool webinars that I highly encourage people to check out, from breaking out of tech addiction, which is obviously really important, to the back to school tech awareness. That's one that I'm really excited that you've done. Stress-free approach to electromagnetic radiation. There's a lot of good stuff here. So highly encourage everybody to get signed up on that.
And we didn't even get to talk about this part, but how central our phones and technology are to this digital ID initiative that's happening worldwide. Like, it's not out of the question one day, if you use an iPhone or a Google Android phone or a Samsung phone or a Microsoft laptop, that one day the infrastructure for digital ID just appears on your laptop or phone. Like, I've done the research. I've seen that it's possible. I've seen that during COVID, they were able to install contact tracing apps on people's phones when the government gets desperate enough for people to download this digital ID. Because I do think in the free world, the Western world, maybe there'll be a lot more resistance to it. So they'll have to play hardball, right? And they could do things like automatically install these apps on people's phones. So I think it's really important for people to use free technology, and that's what we do at Above. That's why we released this report, which I think is really, no one is talking about this. No software company is talking about this, but we're talking about this because it matters, and we need more people to stand up. So yeah, please support. Please read the report. It's very lengthy. When you it's 30 pages or so, but once you get it, you get an executive summary, and you will also get the full report. And the most important part is like kind of what you do with that information. So always open to getting feedback from it. You can chat with us at abovephone.com.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to your point there, I mean, people who haven't gotten Above Phone yet or haven't de-Googled your own phone, if you're using Apple, if you're using Google, you already know, or Microsoft, they force updates on you all the time. So you already understand the problems with that system. So how hard would it be, as you were saying, Hakeem, for them to force a new update, which includes digital ID, just like they did with contact tracing? The other thing I just wanted to mention, so those who are ready to make that step, if you're not just ready to go ahead and check out this report from Above and get some ideas and an understanding on the full scope of the digital ID attack that we're facing, but also if you want to go ahead and get some of their products, which I encourage you to do, you guys have a Black Friday sale going on right now. And that is, I think, another great way to move in this direction, right? To avoid what we were just talking about, being stuck in that ecosystem of Google, of Microsoft, of Apple, et cetera, is to support the Above Phone company and to get you a tablet, get you a laptop, get you a phone. And you guys have the Black Friday sale going on right now. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so this Black Friday sale, it's typically our biggest sale of the year. And so we have our de-Googled phones, which are running open source operating systems like Graphene OS. So these are the most private and secure phones you can get on the market today. And I truly mean that. And I can talk about all the reasons why. But what I would say is these phones can currently support anything your normal phone can do. So they work with any cell service, they work with most of the apps. However, I can't say the same is true for the big tech phones. Soon, within 2 years, those phones will be unable to run any app not approved by Google. So check out this page. It's got Derrick's link, abovephone.com/TCRN, and you'll see these different models we have in stock. We've got some of our new models, which can do a lot of things, are very powerful. It's some of the newest generation phones you can get today. And then we also have some of the more budget models. You see the 7A there. That's pretty cheap at $499. And this is a really good thing to build technological literacy in, right? Because we're preparing. You've got about 2 years before this becomes more available. And so you want to know and understand how to use these tools before then. We also have our laptops, which are based off of Linux. We built our own operating system off of a variant of Linux called Arch Linux, and we have the same principles as the phone. Hey, let's make it as secure and private as possible while still being easy to use. So for me, myself personally, this is all I use, and we have thousands of customers now, many from all walks of life, but many from older generations that are using this without problems. So definitely check that out. The sale will be going on for 9 more days. Also, there are some bonuses with the sale. You will get your first month free of Above Suite off of for any phone or laptop that you get. So Above Suite, you'll get an email, calendar, a VPN, a search engine, video conferencing, encrypted chat, internet phone number. So when you ask yourself, when they put these important software services behind a digital ID wall, what are you going to use? Well, here are some tools that you'll be able to use, and you can start using them today. So I definitely invite you to check that out. And as always, if you purchase any device from us, you get a free Kickstart call with a real live person from within the movement too. We try and hire people who align with our ideals because we know how important this is. So yes, they'll be going on for another 9 days. That's abovephone.com/TCRN. And thank you, Derrick, for being a partner and for promoting us as much as you do.
Yeah, of course. I mean, everybody here knows I only work with people who I feel are aligned, and we've known each other for years, and I'm happy to support the Above Phone. We have one here in our house. And, the way I think about it, because I know sometimes people look at the price points and say, like, well, that looks pretty steep for me. I'm glad, even more you got this sale going on, so this is probably a good chance to jump in. But the way I think about it is like, this is an investment, right? I mean, how many times have people just put down however much, $1,000 on a new iPhone costs? Maybe not everybody in my audience so much, but a lot of people will just spring money, buy drinks at the bar, all sorts of things without giving it a second thought. This is an investment in yourself and in your technology. If you're not ready to just say, hey, I don't want to use a smartphone anymore, I don't want to use laptops. For many of us, like myself, they're kind of necessary tools. So why not embrace a company like Above Phone that is offering you tools that can get you out of that Microsoft, Apple, Google ecosystem, and at least have tools that are going to protect your privacy as much as reasonably possible as we're facing everything that we've gone over today. So highly encourage everybody to check that out. Again, that will be in the show notes. Want to also mention, brother, you're going to be joining us again at the People's Reset in Morelia here in Mexico, January 28th to February 1st. We're just, I don't know if you can believe it, but we're less than 3 months away now. So it's almost time to reunite with everybody. Yeah, we're going to have you and 30 other people. We're going to have Alex Zek, a lot of other cool people from different sectors. Our tech day, I'm really excited about because, you were one of the first people to really help us get our kind of day dedicated to technology going back at the beginning as the Greater Reset back in 2021. And since then, it's evolved from just being strictly maybe crypto and Web3 and kind of blockchain related projects, but to being, you've brought in more like health tech. And then we've got people talking about like spiritual technology. And this year is going to kind of continue some of that, that broadening of what it means. So I'm excited to have you out again and to see what you're going to talk about.
Yeah. I'm really excited for some of the speakers you brought in this year, Derrick. You guys are doing a great job with it. Mike Winter and from Cordal, Jason Crow from Portal. Those are very exciting projects. And also Patrick, who I met the other year, who's working on like a portable water filtration kit, right? So it's not just digital technology. Frankly, I get bored from talking about that so much, but it's such a great mix of people. And I'm also loving how many Mexican speakers are going to be this year. But, I always say the People's Reset was the first conference that occurred after the lockdowns. It's the one that had the courage to step out and create something where everyone could be a part of it. And it's just such an amazing time. I mean, there's a reason we've been doing this for once or twice a year for the past 5 years, because it really means that much to us. And the types of people you meet, you just get inspired. You're filled with happiness. It's just a conscious global community, and you can really feel that. So this year, I'm going to be talking more about the solutions, the health-based solutions we're bringing to the Above Phone. I'm working on some stuff behind the scenes, but to help with the electromagnetic aspects that we have to face when using our phone, to help with the blue light that we are exposed to when it comes to our phones. I've been learning a lot more about that, and it's, you don't think about it as a software engineer, but it really is an occupational hazard that you're around computers so much as you are. So I feel that for anyone who uses computers a lot, and we need to find ways to heal this relationship with our technology if we are going to use it. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm also going to talk about our vision for the next few years and what we could do. Really,
very cool.
Yeah, so it'll be a good talk, and I really look forward to hanging out with you there, Derrick.
Yeah, it's going to be a great time, and I'm sure what we've talked about today, digital IDs, is going to be a hot topic of conversation as well, because for those who haven't been yet, it's in Mexico, in Morelia, Mexico, central Mexico, but we get about 300-400 people from about a dozen or so countries. We typically get 20 plus countries tuned in live from around the world. So this is very much an international event and a multi-generational event. And so people are dealing with the digital ID problem very much right now. And I'm sure that's going to be a hot topic, as I said. So looking forward to having you there, brother. If anybody's interested, I encourage you to go to thepeoplesreset.org. Get your tickets now. You can find them there. Check out all the speakers. If you know any Mexicans locally here in Mexico who are interested in permaculture or empowering technology and taking care of our health, mental, physical, spiritual health, building parallel systems, all these sorts of things, tell them to check it out at thepeoplesreset.org. All right, brother. Thank you so much for joining me today, man. And you've got so many good projects going on, and you're doing some very valuable work. I really just want to emphasize to everybody, if you want to know the latest on digital IDs, this report is the report to check out. It'll be in the show notes. Also, check out the Above Phone and the Black Friday sale going on right now. My link is there in the show notes as well. Any other final thoughts before we let you go?
No, man, I'm just super excited for the future. Like I was saying earlier, this digital ID, you got to look at it as a gift. Even though we're like losing all these things, this is all part of this old world system that's burning away. And the scary part is, what are we going to build in its place? And I just want you to know, wherever you are watching, that you have just as much of a say as Derrick or myself. We're all figuring this out together. So we're coming up with solutions. Some will work, some won't, but we're all going to make an impact wherever we are. We just have to not be complacent and create. So that's what the People's Reset is all about. And thank you. Thank you for having me, Derrick.
Thank you for joining me, brother. And thank you, everybody, for listening today. I've been talking with Hakeem Anwar of AbovePhone.com and Take Back Our Tech. You're going to want to check out his new digital ID report. Guys, we're facing a very difficult situation all around the world. Our human family, we've got to make some hard choices, some lifestyle changes, maybe some relationship changes, but we can make it through it. It's going to take time, effort, energy, and maybe even a little bit of finances. But if we come together, we can make it through this, and we can build the better world that we know is possible. Thank you guys for tuning in. As always, remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.